Are ties in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict ever going to be better, or will they simply deteriorate? Yishai Fleisher?
Sorry about that. They'll continue to deteriorate as long as Israel doesn't strike against the jihad. When we go into these towns and villages and destroy the efforts to bend the minds of young people, of trying to brainwash and manipulate young people and others into believing that Israel will one day not be here, that we should erase Israel, that's what the root of jihadism is. And so what we have to do right now is to go into those places, not just catch the mosquito that comes out, that's the terrorist, but actually go to the place where terrorists are born, where they get inculcated with jihadist ideology.
Yariv Oppenheimer?
It's not the jihad ideology, it's the occupation. And when we have a government that is doing whatever it can in order to make the Palestinian more angry, more despair, more upset about settlements construction, about settler violence, about the violence of the army, daily incident with casualties in the Palestinian side, this is the explosive for the terrorists. This is the fuel for the terror. When they are opening the news and they are hearing Itamar Ben-Gvir threatening to destroy buildings. This is the solution for terror, to destroy just buildings. So this is the fuel for the next terrorist attack.
And last but certainly not least, Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital.
Well, the circumstances on the ground are very troubling for sure. I'm very optimistic about the arc of history, and I think the wheels of history in the end will force us, if not, will force us to some resolution in the West Bank. Right now, the situation is terrible. The northern Samaria is completely out of control. It's not even under the PLO, has no command there. I don't know to allocate the blame. I think this government, that in many respects lives on credit of the past, would have to show its hands and to see what it can do. Words won't solve the situation on the ground. Words like Ben-Gvir, for example, who talks high but can do nothing, won't help us. So the security forces, the Minister of Defense, the head of the army, who is a good friend of mine, maybe they can work it out. But I'm for sure for a resolution in the end.
Well, gentlemen, I want to open up the debate floor now and encourage you all to interact with one another. And I want to start by making reference again. 4 Israelis are dead. Could this be seen as some kind of a revenge attack for the 6 Palestinians that were killed in an IDF anti-terror raid in Jenin just yesterday? Yariv, was this an eye for an eye sort of act?
First of all, I should condemn it, of course. It's obvious, but sometimes you have to say the obvious. There is no excuse for killing civilians or using force. Having said that, yes, of course, there is a connection from what is happening yesterday. And yesterday was a trigger for these 2 terrorists to act. And I'm not so sure it was worth it. The arrest yesterday is not for someone that is a ticking bomb in the Israeli Defense Forces. But the bigger picture is the important one. And what we are seeing today is this government cut all ties with the Palestinian Authority, trying to limit the power of the Palestinian Authority, treating the Palestinian Authority as an enemy, and therefore there is no control over the West Bank. And what we are seeing in the north of the West Bank might be also the reality of all over the West Bank. And the first people to pay the price will be the settlers, the second people to pay the price will be the soldiers, and then also Israeli citizens. This is a very bad policy that that with just using force that they can solve the problem. The opposite. When you just use force and you are not negotiate anything and you are just doing unilateral whatever you like this right-wing government tried to do, the outcome, of course, will be anger, will be support of terrorists, will be more motivation of terrorists to act, and eventually more casualties in both sides. This is what we are seeing in the last few months here in the region.
Yishai, do you tend to agree?
As usual, Yariv blames the victim, and instead of realizing that jihadism is being taught in the schools, in the mosques, in the homes, and we know that. We know that these people are portrayed as martyrs, not for human rights, but for Allah, for jihadism, and for the great act of trying to destroy Israel. If you go to the market in Hebron, even in Jerusalem, you will see the map of Israel sold as a keychain, sold as a T-shirt, and yet what's written over all of Israel is Palestine. This is an effort to erase Israel.
In your map,
And
there is
beginning of
Palestinians.
that erasure,
In your map, in
beginning of that
your
erasure
house,
is
when you
in
have a
Judea
map,
and Samaria,
do you see
and the
Palestine
rest
in
of the
your map?
erasure will continue throughout the whole country. Yariv, if you don't mind, I didn't interrupt you, so give me a second here just to explain my position, and that is that we have to fight against those forces. There are many Arabs that hate jihadism. There are many Palestinians that despise the Hamas and the PLO and want a decent life with Israel. But they're usually beaten down. And that's what they tell me every time. They say to me, because you guys don't strike against the jihad, we are sublimated below them. We cannot live in normal life. We cannot say what we want because we live in fear from the same people you live in fear in. And so the only solution is to strike hard against jihadism, not at the end of it when it comes out and does terror, but at the root of it, where it teaches neo-Nazi ideology. There is no-go zones in Judea and Samaria. There are no-go zones in Jerusalem, no-go zones not far from Tel Aviv, and we have to root those things out.
This is lies, and this is the way to fool the public, because the reality is that the Palestinians are fighting against the occupation. It's not about the jihad. And when you see the people that made this horrible terrorist attack, and when you see who are them, they are not religious. Many of them are secular, and they are doing it on behalf of the Palestinian liberty movement.
You are just a front for the jihad yourself. That's the way it is, and you want to paint it as human rights, but it's not human rights.
I'm talking about the reality. I'm not talking slogans. This is the reality.
Guys, it's a strange discussion. I think we're repeating discussions from 20 years ago. I would say this: we don't want to have this conflict going on religious lines. And I think the right, you have to admit, is pushing us to this direction. It was a national conflict. I want to tell you, two of you, that my mother was born in Sheikh Jarrah. So it's 100 years and more conflict. We are a chapter in this conflict. It doesn't end tomorrow. But on the other hand, I think we went through great milestones, from the peace with Egypt, the peace of Jordan, and I would say the Oslo Accord and the disengagement, and the direction is forward. There's no reverse in history. That's my point, to the right and to the left. I'm not sure how the resolution looks like in the end. Nobody knows, not Yariv and not you. But let's hope. I don't know. But of course, in the meantime, we are in a conflict. We have to fight hard. We fight hard. I don't think words do the fighting, but the army does the fighting. And I think the army fights as much as it can. And I think they are doing good things. Maybe now they have to rethink the strategy. This is true.
And Doron, I want to go off on what you just said there about certain peace initiatives. The first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is the Abraham Accords, which must put Israel's new friends in a bit of a weird spot, knowing that they need to condemn a terror attack like this, but also knowing that they still should or want to, or at least are supposed to, champion the Palestinian cause. And so which one sort of takes preference in an incident like this, or 2 days worth of violence, Yariv?
In this respect, I would salute the Abraham Accords. For every one of us would salute those Abraham Accords as part of a general big picture of the Middle East. And we would love to see some agreement with Saudi Arabia, but I think everybody knows that every agreement with Saudi Arabia would have to contain a Palestinian element, and also the settlers would have to admit it. And I think Bibi knows it. Everybody knows it. I mean, you can't hide it underneath the carpet. So for sure,
we support all the Abraham Accord, but we see who is trying to harm the Abraham Accord, and this is, for example, Itamar Ben-Gvir. When he was elected, he went up to the Temple Mount in order to make this conflict a religious one and not a political one. And the outcome of that was that Netanyahu, that plans to visit the Emirate, never go there. And the reason for that is this coalition, because we have a very anti-peace coalition, very right-wing extreme coalition that deal with this conflict as a religious one, avoiding the issue of the occupation, avoiding the issue of rights, avoiding the political issue, and trying to make it a religious one. And when this is the case, so yes, the Emirate, Bahrain, other Arab countries, of course Saudi Arabia, have much more difficult time to show normalization with Israel because of this government. This government is not the solution; it's the problem for what we are seeing in the Middle East and with the
I do just want to interrupt the debate just for a second to update both you and our viewers that Hamas has just claimed responsibility for the deadly attack today in the West Bank, which brings the question of, if we had to go back, Yariv, to what you were saying about a political conflict, are there political forces on either side that are ready to engage in any kind of dialogue or political kind of solution when Hamas, who is not the de facto ruler of, in particular, certain areas of the West Bank, but rather the Palestinian Authority, is claiming responsibility for these attacks? And we have an Israeli government, as you just mentioned, that has far-right ministers in it that don't seem to want to make peace with the other side.
The Palestinian Authority is ready to speak with the Israeli government and ready to discuss about many issues. The Israeli government is not going to do that, and instead of speaking with the Palestinian Authority, it just embarrassed the Palestinian Authority by allowing, for example, more settlements construction. And this is a gift for Hamas, because Hamas is getting into this vacuum, saying to the Palestinian Authority, you are not relevant, the Israeli government is not talking with you, the only language that the Israelis understand is force, and this is why we are acting. And we need to confront that not just by fighting Hamas, but also to restart negotiations, speaking with the Palestinian Authority, trying to calm down the issue, and yes, also to stop building settlements and to do provocation that just help Hamas to get more support among the Palestinians.
Yishai, we have 30 seconds left before we go out for a break. Do you tend to agree or disagree?
I think that my colleagues speak like, West Europeans, and they want to keep on finding a way to make this conflict political. But the fact that
we are not racist.
What they seem to not understand is that you just said it. It was Hamas. Hamas is a religious, ideological movement, and it wants to destroy Israel. It calls for the destruction of Israel. And the way to beat them is to root them out.
There, because we do have to go out for a quick break. But as it's clear, a fortune of passion in this debate. But we'll be right back. Hold your thoughts. 2 minutes. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us here on Global Eye. And just before we reconvene the summit with Yishai Fleisher, Yariv Oppenheimer, and Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, just before the break, we were talking about Israel's far-right government and their response. And the question that I want to start with, just before we dive into it, take a listen to these syncs. Is it possible that Israel could return to targeted killings and possibly warrant the death penalty for terrorists?
We have already proven in recent months that we settle the accounts with all of the murderers, without exception. Anyone who hurts us is either dead or in prison. It will be the same now. But I want to say to all those who seek to harm us, all options are open. We will continue to fight terrorism with all our might, and we will win.
The time has come to launch a military operation in the West Bank. Yes, to go back to targeted assassinations from the air, to take down buildings, put up roadblocks, and expel terrorists, and to pass the death penalty law for terrorists.
I want to pick up just before we open the debate floor with another 30-second round. And because I cut you off earlier, Yishai, I'd like to start with you. Can we expect stronger punishment for terrorists that carry out attacks against Israelis?
I think those clips that you saw right now really represent the will of the Israeli people. And that is that we have jihadist terrorism. 4 Israelis have been murdered today by the Hamas. And nobody wants to hear the hand-wringing Woody Allen style of like self-conflagellation, feeling like we're the bad guys because we're the victims. No, it's time to fight the jihad. It's time to do exactly what the minister and the prime minister just said, which is to fight the bad guys, root them out, defend our peoplehood, and defend Israel as the Jewish state.
Doron Avital.
Yeah, I think, Yishai, with all due respect, those words are embarrassing, okay? What are you talking about? We are fighting with the Hamas and we are fighting forcefully with the Hamas. I think that this engagement is an excellent example where we are a contained entity, which is an enemy. As a military man, I can tell you that enemy contained with our borders is something that we can handle. But the West Bank is a different story. It has to be treated seriously. Death penalty will never happen. Death penalty is something that we can never breach. And I'm telling you, words never won wars. Only brave action by leaders. And I trust you that all the 3 of us know that Ben-Gvir is not such a brave leader, okay? So let's be serious about what we are having here, because it's a serious circumstances.
Right.
The people of Israel have shown that they want to fight back.
And finally, I'd like to give 30 seconds a chance to Yariv Oppenheimer.
We all know who Ben-Gvir is, okay? So don't give me this bullshit. Okay?
We all know that's why we voted for him. It's that simple.
You voted for Ben-Gvir. He would never deliver what he
Before
said
we
he would
open up the
deliver,
debate
Yishai.
floor here, I'd
You
like
must
to give
know it.
Yariv
He will never
30
deliver what he
seconds to
said.
respond.
Those are empty words. Empty words don't win wars. Get it into your head. Empty words always use.
Doron, just before we open up the floor, let's give Yariv 30 seconds to respond to that.
I want to remind us all that these two terrorists were killed today, and most of the terrorists that are attacking Israelis are being killed on the scene or maybe a few days later. So death penalty will not threaten anyone that is ready to die for the cause and for terror. That's why this is counterproductive. And all these slogans about fighting more, eventually people voted for Itamar Ben-Gvir because they wanted security. And the outcome is that we don't have security, and we will not have security. Because if we would just escalate the fight without any political solution, the outcome will be also escalation in the other side, more casualties, more Israelis being killed, more soldiers being killed, and then we will see the popularity of Ben-Gvir really getting into the bottom. But the misery and the sadness and the lack of hope, this will be the reality for Israelis and for Palestinians. This is where this government is going.
So I want to shift gears just slightly now that we can open up the debate floor a little bit more. We've spoken about, while briefly, the Israeli government's response. But the question that I have now is, what about the other side? Palestinian students and many others in the West Bank, obviously not the entire population, have been rallying behind Hamas and the PIJ that are not even forces that are in control politically of the West Bank. Is that because it's their only option between Hamas, PIJ, and even the armed faction of Fatah, that there is just armed resistance as an option and no actual political forces willing to put their case forward?
Why don't you just believe the voting that they're doing? Why don't you just believe them when they vote for Hamas? Maybe they believe in Hamas ideology. Maybe they've been taught to believe it, and now they believe it. Why don't you believe them when they're voting? Why do you have to psychoanalyze it in a different way? The folks today have become jihadists and have become anti-Israel, and that's what they're voting for. And so soon the PA is leaving the seat. Soon it'll be Hamas, and that's what we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to destroy these folks. The ideology of Hamas is taking over the young people because we've allowed that through the processes of Oslo and the disengagement. We've allowed Hamas to take over.
We are not aware enough. We are not aware enough.
Hold on just a second. I see Doron was itching to comment there.
Yeah, Yishai, we have to put the facts right. To connect Oslo with the emergence of Hamas, of course, our greatest fear is Hamas taking hold in the West Bank. This is what we are fighting against, of course. That's what we do. That's what we do. Ben-Gvir wouldn't do it because he can't command nothing. You have to get it, Yishai.
Ben-Gvir is the minister of police, not the minister of the army.
I'm talking to you right now as an Israeli to Israeli. Let me tell you, to conduct operation, military operation, it requires wisdom, professionalism, understanding of the enemy, respect to the enemy sometimes. I was a company commander in the First Lebanon War. I know what it means. I'm telling you that this kind of leadership for Ben-Gvir and Smotrich won't deliver nothing. And let me explain another thing. Trust me that Bibi himself is fearful from letting those two get handle on the events in the West Bank. And now he would rely on Herzl, the head of the army, and Gallant to try to resolve the situation.
But we are not Please, we are not aware enough of the daily life in the West Bank. And the daily life of the West Bank of the ordinary Palestinian is horrible because the Itamar Ben-Gvir spirit is what the Palestinians are facing daily, not just from the settlers, but also from the army. And when the reality is gloom, when you have no hope, when you have no alternative, this is the reason why the motivation and the support for terrorist attack is so high, because the alternative is just to suffer from the extreme violence of the settlers and from the government action, including expansion settlements, and really suffocating the Palestinian communities.
I don't undermine the fact, and Yishai would agree, that there are those forces in the Palestinian, they don't think of any context of resolution. For sure, we know that. It's part of our conflict. It's part of our story, of course. I'm not naive in this fashion. I'm just saying, as long as we don't move forward in some fashion, things in the end would attack us back.
I agree. We should move forward. We should move forward, and the way to move forward
and not
is
reverse,
certainly
not taking the West Bank again.
That's right. That's right. We have to. We have to settle our land, and thank God that this government is now allowing 4,000 new buildings to be built. Thank God for the units to be built. It's not occupying; it's our ancestral homeland, and it's sad.
No, never mind. Annexing. Those are words. Yishai, talk practically.
Push back on the jihad, and of course, a strong Israel surrounded by strong Arab countries. That's called the Abraham Accords, and that's the way to move forward. A strong Jewish Israel.
Why do you want the West Bank? Why do you want the West Bank, Yishai? Why do you want the West Bank? Because of religion, right? And you are ready to fight for the occupation because of your religion. This is jihad. You are jihad. Not the Palestinians. You are the jihad person here. You would like to see a war that is being based on religious. You are going to the Temple Mount. You are jihadists, not the Palestinians. Let's look at yourself in the mirror.
The Temple Mount is jihadist. Got it. You are totally detached from Judaism, and that's why you're voted out. Nobody's like politics anymore because
the Zionist movement.
Practically, what you're offering.
Practically, a big, strong Israel is the practical way forward.
Let me tell you.
A strong Israel that defeats jihadism is
in my words, what you're offering is to reverse the wheels of history, to reverse the Oslo Accord, to annex
not to reverse it, to move it forward. That's right, reverse Oslo. Yes, reverse Oslo. Correct. Correct. That was the worst decision ever made. To give up your homeland to the jihad, that was stupid, and everybody knows it.
This is semantics. Annexing the West Bank. That's what you offer. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah, annex the West Bank, annex our homeland. That's right. That's the semantics.
That's right. That's what you.
The best thing.
I don't hide it. It's simple. Our homeland is
Gentlemen, I do want to interrupt to say that unfortunately we are out of time, but evidently not out of passion, in particular on a very touchy subject here in Israel and the West Bank. But I want to thank you all very much for coming on the show this evening.